Incredible facts about the Challenger disaster at 5 p.m. on January 28, 1986. President Ronald Reagan delayed his State of the Union address to give a heartfelt speech on the Challenger shuttle disaster. He had insisted that newcomer Peggy Noonan write it. Reagan began by impressing on the audience, particularly the children, that such painful things were part of the process of exploration and discovery. He went on to invoke the legacy of explorer Francis Drake, and concluded by saying that the nation would never forget seeing the 5 crew members, the engineer, and the teacher, whom he dubbed the Challenger 7, as they slipped the surly bonds of Earth to touch the face of God. It was one of the most important speeches in modern American history. With that speech in mind, let's remind ourselves of and learn more about this national tragedy. 3. The engineer who anticipated it and blamed himself. Bob Ebeling was the leader and organizer of a group of 5 engineers who foresaw the lethal disaster coming, so much so that the group tried to convince NASA to cancel the launch. Ebeling also told his wife the shuttle would blow up the next day. 3 weeks into the investigation, he was one of 2 engineers then anonymously informed National Public Radio of their attempt to have the launch cancelled. It wasn't until 2016 that Ebeling identified himself to NPR's listeners, along with his colleague Roger Boyce-Joy. Even though they'd done what most people would consider all a person could do to attempt to save the 7 crew members, the very religious Ebeling was extremely hard on himself for not going further for the following 30 years. He went so far as to call the fact he was one of the people who was in a place to attempt to convince NASA not to go forward with the launch one of God's mistakes. He went into a depression shortly after the disaster that compelled him to retire. There was a silver lining to this story. After National Public Radio broadcast his interview, there was an outpouring of support from listeners for Ebeling. He received numerous phone calls and letters, one of the more notable ones being from his superior Alan MacDonald, who reminded him that Ebeling had been one of the people who started the movement and that he'd gone above and beyond the call of duty. Even Robert Lund, one of the people directly involved in the decision to launch and someone who'd been forced to move by the local backlash, called Ebeling and told him that he and the 4 other engineers had done all they could. Charles Bolden, a NASA administrator, wrote him to commend Ebeling for inspiring other engineers at NASA, and for reminding personnel in the administration that they had to be vigilant in ensuring the safety of future missions. Ebeling's wife Kathy told NPR that these messages had significantly lifted her husband's spirits too. Beyonce's sample in one of the most questionable moments of alleged attempted tributes in popular culture. Beyonce decided to sample part of the news coverage provided by NASA Public Relations Officer Steve Nesbitt for her 2013 song So. The sample was flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction to put this at the beginning of a love song instead of any sort of memorial for the event was inevitably seen as an extremely distasteful joke, a sentiment that was barely changed by Beyonce's statements after the fact that she meant for the song to help to heal, not that any of the controversy prevented the song from going gold. 1. Richard Feynman's demonstration in by far the most famous bit of forensic work after the explosion. Caltech physicist and Nobel laureate Richard Feynman demonstrated in 1986 that the O-rings used to connect the solid fuel rocket boosters weren't sealing properly by dunking one of them in a glass of cold water and showing the press that it had lost all elast.
Subscribe now.